There's a man sitting alone at a computer. He's just read something in the news, a name he hasn't seen in years. He stares out the window, and somewhere, behind his eyes, a summer starts playing back. A summer he was 12 years old. A summer he walked the railroad tracks with his best friends in the world and found a dead boy in the woods. A summer he never really left. That's how Stand By Me begins. Not with the kids, not with the adventure, with the man at the end of something, looking back at the beginning of everything. And the last thing we hear before the screen goes dark is his voice. The same voice, older and quieter, and tired in a specific way that only grief makes you tired. I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? That line, that one line, if you've seen this film, you didn't forget it. You couldn't. Because the first time it hit you, something in your chest recognized it before your brain did. Not the 1959 setting, not Castle Rock, Oregon, not the railroad tracks, something older than all of that. Something that lives in the particular ache of knowing exactly when the best part was, and knowing it only after it was already gone. Stand By Me was released on August 22nd, 1986. Rob Reiner directed it. It was adapted from a Stephen King novella called The Body, and it was made for about $8 million that producer Norman Lear paid out of his own pocket when a studio sale nearly killed the whole thing mid-development. It had no distributor until a Columbia Pictures executive screened it at home while sick, and his daughters fell in love with River Phoenix. It grossed $52 million. It earned an Oscar nomination. It launched Castle Rock Entertainment, and became quietly and permanently the standard by which every coming-of-age film that followed gets measured. But none of that is why you remember it. Welcome back to Cinemastalgia, the show dedicated to the films that shaped us, moved us, and stayed with us long after the credits rolled. Tonight, we're walking the tracks. Let's relive the movies that made us. It's the summer of 1959, and Vern Tessio has been under his porch looking for his penny jar when he hears his older brother and a friend talking about something they're not supposed to know. A kid went missing a few days ago from a town called Harlow. His name is Ray Brower, and Vern's brother knows where the body is. Vern climbs out from under his porch and goes to find his friends. His face is doing something complicated, excited and scared in that specific way that 12-year-olds get when something enormous falls into their laps. He has information. He has a secret. He has the thing that every kid that age wants more than almost anything else in the world, a reason to go. That's the spark. 4 boys, Gordy LaChance, Chris Chambers, Teddy Duchamp, Vern Tessio, deciding that they'll walk to Harlow, find Ray Brower's body, and be heroes. Their name in the paper, probably on television, the adventure of their lives. They have no idea what the adventure is actually going to be. Before there was a film, there was a novella. Stephen King published The Body in 1982 in a collection of different seasons. 4 stories, none of them horror, each tied to a season. It shared a table of contents with Rita Hayworth, Shawshank Redemption, and Apartment Pupil. 3 of those 4 became critically acclaimed films, but The Body, subtitled Fall from Innocence, was the one King himself called the only autobiographical story he ever wrote. Gordy LaChance is 12 years old. He has a dead older brother. He has a father who can't look at him without seeing who's missing. He's an invisible boy who tells stories because it's the only way he knows how to be real. That's where this all begins, with a writer going back to find the boy he was. And it took a director willing to look just as deep into himself to figure out how to bring that boy to the screen. Gordy LaChance doesn't know what he's looking for when he leaves Castle Rock. He thinks he's looking for Ray Brower. He thinks he's going to be a hero. But what he's really doing, what the whole trip is actually about, though nobody names it until they're deep into the woods and it's 2 a.m. and the fire is dying, is trying to find out if his life is worth anything. His father can barely stand to look at him. His brother Denny is dead, a football hero, the son the family actually wanted. And his parents are still so lost in grief that Gordy has essentially become a ghost in his own home. He writes stories, he tells them to his friends, and he has no idea if any of it matters. Rob Reiner saw himself when he read the screenplay. He also saw the problem. The script was about 4 boys equally, and he knew immediately that that was wrong. He spent days driving around Los Angeles mulling it over, and then the answer came. Make it about 1 boy. Let Gordy be the center of gravity. Let everything else, the friendship, the adventure, the body, the confrontation, orbit around this specific kid who doesn't believe he's worth anything and needs the summer to prove himself wrong. Once Reiner made that decision, the film came alive. What he didn't say as often was that Gordy had also become Reiner. He grew up as Carl Reiner's son, the great comedian, the legend, and spent years wondering if his own talent was really his or just an inheritance. He has called Stand By Me the film closest to me of all the films that I've done. Not The Princess Bride, not When Harry Met Sally, but this one. This story about a boy who needs someone to tell him that he mattered. Finding the boy who could carry all that, who could be Gordy, really be him, turned out to require something more than an audition. Over 300 boys auditioned. About 70 were interviewed, and River Phoenix came in reading for Gordy. Think about that for a second. River Phoenix as the quiet, grieving, invisible writer boy. Will Wheaton as the loyal, protective, volcanic Chris Chambers. It's a completely different film. It might have even been a great film. But Reiner looked at River Phoenix and saw something too old, too knowing, too complicated for Gordy, and exactly right for Chris. Then he looked at Wheaton and stopped auditioning. What he saw in Wheaton wasn't performance. It was the actual kid. Wheaton has talked about his interviews for decades. His childhood was one of emotional invisibility, pushed into acting by his parents, living in the shadow of a brother who got the warmth he didn't. He didn't understand until he was in his 40s how completely he was Gordy, not playing him, but being him. We're both invisible in our homes, he said. We have a brother who is the golden child. Corey Feldman, already a star from Gremlins and The Goonies, got Teddy, the boy with the cracked army helmet, the boy who screams at a junkyard owner who dared insult his father, the father who burned Teddy's ear on a stove. Feldman's home life at the time was genuinely abusive. He knew what it felt like to explode. He knew what it meant to love a parent who kept hurting you. And Jerry O'Connell, 11 years old, making his first film. He was just Vern. Purely, completely, beautifully Vern. Before they shot a single frame, Reiner had all 4 boys spend 2 weeks playing theater games and doing improv exercises together. No scripts, no blocking. Just 4 kids learning how to exist in the same space. When you watch them walk those tracks together, the rhythm of it, the comfort of it, that's what you're seeing. But the boy at the center of it all, the one carrying the most, that was River Phoenix. And what he brought to Chris Chambers is something the film has never fully recovered from losing. The boys are camped out, deep in the woods, and Chris and Gordy are the only ones still awake. The fire is low, and Chris starts talking. He tells Gordy about the milk money. He stole it, or at least everyone thinks he did, because he's the Chambers, and Chambers boys steal. That's just how it is. Except he didn't. He found it. He tried to return it to the teacher, and she spent it on herself anyway, because nobody was going to believe a Chambers kid over their own convenience. And then Chris cries. River Phoenix just cries. Not movie crying, real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere so specific that it can't be faked. Reiner didn't direct that scene in the traditional sense. He told Phoenix, quietly, to think about a time that an adult he trusted had let him down. The next take is what's in the film. Phoenix was born in Oregon, grew up partly in Venezuela as part of a missionary group, learned how to busk for money on the streets of the American South before a talent agent found him. He came into acting sideways, through necessity, then fell into it completely. He identified with Chris so deeply that it scared him. He said, if I didn't have my family to go back to after the shoot, I'd probably have to find a psychiatrist. He was nominated for an Oscar for Running on Empty 2 years later. He was extraordinary in My Private Idaho. He was, as Will Wheaton later put it, the one who was going to have the Tom Hanks career. He died on Halloween night, 1993, outside the Viper Room in Los Angeles. He was 23 years old. And Chris Chambers, stabbed at a fast food restaurant trying to stop a fight, 20 years too early, was waiting for him like a prophecy nobody wanted to read. The film around those 4 boys was built with care, ingenuity, and, in at least one legendary moment, manufactured terror. The train trestle scene is one of the purest suspense sequences of the 1980s. The boys are nearly across the bridge when they hear it. The whistle, the rumbling, the size of the thing bearing down from behind them. Gordy and Vern are still out there on the trestle when the train rounds the bend, and there's nowhere to go, nowhere to dive, nothing to do but run. It is genuinely frightening. And Rob Reiner manufactured that fear with a single technical trick in one act of directed cruelty. The trick? a long telephoto lens that compressed the distance between the boys and the locomotive, making the train appear far closer than it actually was. The boys were never in any real danger. The cruelty? Reiner stood off camera and told them that if they couldn't actually look scared, something was wrong with them, and that they should worry about him being upset. The camera caught the panic of children who didn't know whether to fear the train or their director. Principal photography ran June 7th through August 22nd, 1985. Brownsville, Oregon, a small town between Salem and Eugene, stood in for Castle Rock. The trestle was above Lake Britain in northeastern California. About 100 Brownsville locals appeared as extras. The Barfarama pie eating contest that Gordy tells around the campfire used a vomit mixture of pie filling and large curd cottage cheese, supplied by a local bakery, deployed in quantities Reiner later described as excessive. The leeches scene used a man-made lake that sat open for 6 weeks before filming and had filled naturally and completely with real insects and worms. The boys were not acting. Reiner had them smoke cabbage leaves instead of cigarettes. The film was built from the ground up with this kind of specificity. And Stephen King, who was visiting the set, told Reiner that his only note was that Reiner shouldn't take any notes. Because what Reiner was building, scene by scene, was something larger than an adventure movie. He was building an argument about what childhood actually costs. And then, the boys finally find Ray Brower. They've walked 30 miles. They've crossed the trestle. They survived the leeches, the junkyard dog, the older boys with switchblades. They have arrived. And the body is just there. In the tall of the grass off the side of the tracks, a boy their age, face up, shoes missing, a dried streak of blood from his nose to his chin. Not monstrous, not dramatic, just gone. And Gordy looks at him and completely falls apart. Not for Ray Brower, but for Denny. Why did it have to be him? It should have been me. The whole journey was a detour. The whole trip was about grief he didn't know he was carrying until it had nowhere left to hide. This is what Stand By Me is actually about. Not adventure, not summer. Death is everywhere. Not as horror, but as the thing the boys are circling without naming. The trip to find Ray Brower is a way of looking at mortality with enough distance to survive it. When Gordy finally sees the body, that distance collapses. And then there's the confrontation at the end. Gordy, invisible, overlooked, told his whole life that he doesn't matter, pulls a gun on Ace Merrill and fires it into the air and says, "I'll kill you. I swear to God I will." He means it. And then he walks away. There's a song underneath all of this. A song with its own improbable, beautiful story of second chances. Ben E. King wrote Stand By Me in 1961, a gospel-rooted soul ballad, co-written with Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. Built on a bass line Stoller added almost as an afterthought when King came in with the melody already formed. It went to number 4 on the pop charts, number 1 on R&B, and then settled into the corners of American music and waited. The film wasn't always called Stand By Me. It was The Body, until Columbia Pictures pointed out that nobody would know what that meant. Rob Reiner suggested the song. They went with it. When the film came out in August of 1986, the song re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 for the first time in 25 years. It peaked at number 9 and went to number 1 in the UK by January of 1987. A song about presence, about not running, about standing with someone in the dark when there's nowhere else to be. Rob Reiner founded Castle Rock Entertainment the year after the film, naming it after the fictional town. The company went on to produce When Harry Met Sally, Misery, The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, and Seinfeld. The town that never existed became the name of an empire. And then there's The Empty Chair. At the 40th anniversary celebration of the film, Will Wheaton asked about River Phoenix. He talked for a moment, and then he said, "There is always a chair. At every reunion, every anniversary, every screening. A chair for a man who was 23 years old when he died, and who will be 23 years old forever. And you never stop noticing it. I never had any friends later on, like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus. Does anyone?" There's something Stand By Me understands about nostalgia that most films get wrong. It doesn't pretend that the past was a paradise. The summer of 1959 in Castle Rock, Oregon is full of cruelty. Fathers who burned their sons. Fathers who'd buried their grief in silence. Older boys with switchblades. A world that had decided what each of these kids was worth before they were old enough to argue. The nostalgia in this film isn't for innocence. It's for the aliveness of it. The total, overwhelming presence of being 12 and in the woods with the people who mattered most in the world. And then it ends. That's what the film is mourning. Not the era, not childhood in the abstract. The specific, unrepeatable fact that it ended, and that nothing that comes after, no matter how good, has quite that weight to it. And every year, new people walk into it for the first time, and the closing line finds them wherever they are and does exactly what it always did. Because Gordy was right. We all had a summer like that. Most of us only got one. And for the rest of our lives, every quiet Tuesday, every old song on the radio, every moment we look up from what we're doing and feel something we can't quite name, the rest of our lives is just us trying to figure out what that meant.